Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Episode 13. Hopefully it'll be a good one. We're getting into chapter 7. Chapter 7 already. It's been a good time. Been going through Justinian. Good old Justinian. Yeah. Good to be back. You know, it takes a... Did I do a Friday? Yeah, I did a Friday stream last week. I didn't do a Wednesday one last week because it didn't... Because the weather didn't want me to. I'm assuming it's the weather. It was the weather, at least. But yeah, we did one on Friday, and it was good. It was good. We got through the chapter. Oh my goodness, I need to. Hold on. Yeah. Got to fix something. Yeah, so last Friday, we unveiled the new system, the new PDF reader. Still working through it. This is, if you weren't here last week, this is my note-taking app, or a note-taking program that I use called Obsidian Notes. Works well. I kind of like the new setup. Eventually, we're gonna polish it. When I have time, I'm gonna sit down and really dive deep into some of the community plugins. Really streamline the whole thing. But we're not there yet. But we're starting a little late tonight. I had some stuff I had to take care of beforehand. I got a little cat now. He's with the parents inside, so he's not bothering me during the stream right now, but I'm going to grab him afterwards. But I had to get some stuff ready for the cat. You know, some food, some water, litter box, all that good stuff. So that's why I'm a little late. That, and I had to eat. Had to eat food. But last Friday, I do not even slightly recall. Oh no, I do kind of recall what we kind of chatted about. Persia. We got deep into Justinian's policies in Persia. Started with some of his administrative changes, and then we got into him and the various intrigues with Persia. The Sassanids? The Gassanids, maybe? To me, the most interesting part was at a certain point he talked about what was basically a proxy war between Justinian and the Persian kings. Which I found that very interesting because it kind of just shows, the more things change, the more they stay the same, that whole kind of thing. It's like, yeah, we're 2,000 years later, and still one of the most powerful nations in the world is waging a proxy war against Persia. We're not now, obviously. The U.S. isn't waging a proxy war now, but we have in the past. The U.S. and Israel have waged proxy wars against Persia, Iran. Iran has waged proxy wars against Israel and the U.S. And so it's funny. It's funny, the politics in the Middle East never change. Nothing ever changes in the Middle East. And I find that funny. But we're getting into, I think this is the last chapter specifically about Justinian, or about Justinian's time. And so what I want to do is, once we finish this chapter, hopefully, I don't think it's that long of a chapter. Hopefully it should just be today. And, speaking of I was going to say today and Friday, but there probably will be a stream on Friday, but it will definitely be late, and it might be pretty short, which could be perfect. Because if it's just finishing up this chapter, let's see, so we're on page 228 of the PDF, or 155 of the PDF. 155. 173. So it should only be 2 streams to get through this chapter. Hopefully I can get through a good bit of it today and then finish it off on Friday. Friday will be late and it will probably be short. If I do it at all, I might just cancel it. I don't know. I have something Friday night happening at the house. It'll probably end. It starts at 6. Probably will end about 7:30. So I might shoot for 8, 8:15, and just go until 9, 9:15, or something like that. But we'll probably be doing that. I can't move it to Thursday. Tomorrow is the feast of the Ascension of our Lord into heaven. So I am attending Mass tomorrow evening. So I will not have time tomorrow. Plus, I'm not sure. I don't know if this counts as work. I don't know if I'm allowed. What does the church say about streaming on a? What does the church say about streaming on a holy day of obligation? Is it work? Probably not. It's a hobby. But I don't know. When's the encyclical on streaming? On streaming on Sundays. But so probably Friday night, late and short. We'll finish up the chapter for sure. We'll get through this chapter this week. And then the week after, we will take a break from Birth of the Middle Ages by Henry St. Lawrence Beaufort Moss. Great name, honestly. And we will read through the first chapter of En Route by Joris Karl Huysmans. I'm pronouncing the name terribly. I will actually just write it out for you in chat so you can see what it's supposed to be. I've heard it pronounced Huysmans, but I've also heard it pronounced Huysmans. Here, actually. So you can see it on the stream. Sure. I'm terrible at spelling. That's him. Actually, if you look at my profile picture on Twitter now, it is just a picture of him. Because he's inspired me in a great many ways. And so that'll be fun. It'll be a little dive into some more prose-ish style writing. A little discussion about some Gregorian chant, some polyphony, maybe a little bit. It'll be fun. We'll take a little break, a little bit of a breather from some history. But without that out of the way, let us get into it. Chapter 7, The Aftermath. The ruin of Justinian's handiwork was nowhere seen so speedily as in northern Italy. A few years after his death, the Lombards burst into the plains that lie between Alps and Po, and in a short time had possessed themselves of the district. From their original home in the Elbe region, they had traveled across Europe by stages. By the end of the 5th century, they were the ruling power in Hungary, and soon afterwards, by crushing the Heruls, they became Rome's neighbor on the Danube. Their conversion to Arian Christianity and the introduction of more settled conditions led to an increase in the royal power, as was usually the case with German peoples when thus exposed to Roman influences. But the culture which they acquired here was very slight. A century later, they appeared to the Romans to be typical barbarians. Their king, though absolute, was little more than a war leader chosen for a single campaign. They possessed no magistrates or constitution. The blood feud still reigned supreme, and the real bond of society was the clan. Since their departure from the Elbe, they had rarely remained settled on the same land for more than one generation, and their agriculture was consequently primitive, since even in Hungary they had left the field work to be done by slaves and subject people, while they themselves plundered the territory of their neighbors. Roll how far you want me to roll that back? We could just here let me hold on real quick. Here preface between the ancient terrible joke. Shouldn't have even done it. Not worth it. Anyway, hitherto the Lombards and Gepids had been the leading forces on the Danube frontier. Justinian had, in Rome's customary fashion, retained Sirmium, the key point of the district, for the empire by playing off one people against the other. The entry of the Avars, a fierce tribe of Asiatic origin, broke up this situation. Using the Lombards as their cat's paw, they destroyed the Gepid kingdom, taking most of the territory and booty for themselves. Ayo. The Lombards were now in sorry plight. Their independence was threatened by the Avars, and the hoped-for increase of land was not forthcoming. In desperation, they embarked upon what was to prove the final stage of their migration. Just scroll back and throw it on ×2 speed, and you'll catch up pretty quickly. In 568, under the leadership of Alboin, the Lombard host set out for Italy, its numbers swollen by adventurers of various races. Narses, governor of Italy, had just been recalled, and the frontier defenses seem to have offered no effective resistance. To be honest, though, I only have like 2 viewers. I could go back and just reread all of this. But basically what he's saying is he's giving kind of a brief history of the Lombards. They started in the Elbe region. They moved into Hungary, became Rome's neighbor, adopted Arian Christianity. They didn't really develop culturally. Their king was absolute, but more of a war leader. Blood feud reigned supreme. They departed from the Elbe, went to Hungary, and forced the Gepids out. Justinian had, in customary fashion, played the Gepids and the Lombards against each other, used the Lombards as a cat's paw. And then in 568, under the leadership of Alboin, they set out to Italy. And Italy offered no resistance. So, quick little catch up for you. You and I are the definition of replay gang. Replay gang for the streamer that matters most, that is. But so you got my little recap. Cividale fell, and the Friuli region was soon overrun. The Patriarch of Aquileia left his doomed city and fled to the lagoons of Grado. The Imperialists retained Padua and Mantua, holding the Po line. Ayo, the fat panda line, and preventing the Lombards from streaming down the eastern coast. But Vicenza and Verona were lost, and the frontier region of the southern Tyrol was now cut off from Ravenna. A year later, Alboin entered Milan, and finally, after a long siege, captured Pavia, which became the Lombard capital. Northern Italy had been torn from the empire, but worse was to come. In succeeding years, Ravenna and Rome itself were continually threatened, and Byzantine counterattacks successfully beaten off, while 2 independent Lombard bands pressed southward to found the great duchies of Spoleto and Benevento. Let us real quick. No, wrong one. Here it is. Let's see. This should be let's go with 592. Pulling up a map for those wondering. Here we are. All right. So they came from the Po region, or let's see. They marched into Italy from the north, from Hungary. Let's see. The Friuli. So they started basically at Aquileia, which is right here. They moved this way. Verona. They took Vicenza. They took. Then they moved. Let's see. Which one is Milan? Ravenna's here. Ravenna was cut off. Milan is here. This right here is Milan. Mediolanum. It was the capital at a certain point during this time period. Yes. 395 it was the capital, was Milan. Verona, Vicenza. Yeah. So Vicenza and Verona were lost. Southern Tyrol was cut off from Ravenna. He enters Milan, and after a long siege captures Pavia. Pavia is, I'm assuming, here. Northern Italy. So this whole area is just now under Lombard rule. Ravenna is under siege a good bit. Rome is under siege. And he says at the end, two independent Lombard bands pressed southward to found the great duchies of Spoleto and Benevento. So Spoleto let's see. Where is Spoleto? Here's Spoleto. Beneventum. So these are two independent duchies. Actually, you know, this whole area here that is not red is Lombard territory now. This whole area here is still Roman territory, but the Greeks at this point don't care about it anymore. It's a lost cause. And so they offer no assistance. You have the imperial, not ambassador, but the imperial regent, governor. He stays in Ravenna and he does nothing for the next 300 years. At a certain point, I'm pretty sure the Roman citizens murder one of them, if I remember correctly. But the leader of this territory right here is some unimportant guy in Rome who he goes by the title of Pope. Not some insignificant guy, right? But the Pope in Rome is essentially the ruler of Italy at this point. He has all of the power. Everyone in Italy relies on the Pope for leadership and guidance. And he holds all the cards. And this isn't solidified until about 750 to 780. I forget the exact date. But Charlemagne's father, Pepin the Great, donates basically all of this, conquers all of this land, and then gives it to the Pope, officially starting the Papal States and officially making the Pope a temporal leader as well as the spiritual leader. And that donation, the donation of Pepin, is rewarded half a century later, but it is rewarded to his son Charlemagne when he is made the true successor of Rome. And at his crowning on Christmas Day, 799? 799, maybe? I think it's 799. 800. Christmas Day, the year 800, Pope Leo III crowns Charlemagne Emperor of the West. And he is technically, the Holy Roman Empire isn't founded at this point, technically, but it basically is. He's the grandfather of the Holy Roman Empire, which is the true successor to the Roman Empire, as much to the chagrin of the Greeks. But if you want to be the Roman Empire, you got to be in union with Rome. But that's all I will say on that. I saw some guy on Twitter. He posted one of those. It's a meme where it's like it's about mental gymnastics. And it's like the first picture is the mental, basically, the mental gymnastics you have to do for something simple. It's like, oh, the mental gymnastics is you start at one end of the pad and you walk to the other and you do your pose. And it's like, wow, no gymnastics whatsoever. And then the other one is someone doing all of these tricks, all of these your typical gymnastic tricks. The way this person was using it was the mental gymnastics to decide who the successor of Rome is. It's like the gymnastics for the Byzantine Empire. It's like, oh, we're directly descended from Rome. We're the direct continuation of the Roman Empire. And then it had like a bunch of stuff for the Holy Roman Empire, making fun of basically the claim that the Holy Roman Empire is the true successor of Rome. And that dude was just getting clowned on. It was great. It was great to see. The Greeks need to be put in their place. We are Rome. Europe is Rome. Rome is in Europe. We speak Latin. The church, the Pope, the Roman Pontiff declared that Charlemagne and his descendants were the successors of Rome. It's as clear cut as you can get. But when will the Greeks learn? The biggest proof to me is that Constantinople isn't even in the hands of Catholics anymore. Rome is the eternal city, and it's still standing, and it's in the hands of Catholics. Or it's in, the Christian nation. Rome is still sovereign. Rome is still a Catholic city. Constantinople isn't. To me, that's the biggest proof. The proof that the Pope is the person who decides who is the continuation. But I don't know. I probably phrased that in a very bad, or a very not very concise way. Not a very coherent way. I will workshop that and think about it. Anyway. The death of Alboin was followed by a kingless period of more than 10 years. The conquest had been carried out by means of subordinate leaders, who were placed in command of garrisons in the principal towns. Gradually, these dukes, about 35 in number, became settled in the districts they had originally occupied, and the duchies developed into hereditary domains, largely independent of the central power. The weakness of the kingship, which permitted this independence, is the determining factor in Lombard history. A strong monarch might reduce to obedience his recalcitrant dukes and even, on rare occasions, control the powerful duchies of the south. But the initial period of freedom had done its work. Lombardy was always a kingdom divided against itself. Its enemies, emperors, popes, or Frankish invaders, could always count on the support of some rebellious Lombard noble. And it was due to this lack of cohesion that the conquest of Italy was never brought to completion. Byzantium could spare few troops to reinforce her garrisons. The power of the papacy was as yet undeveloped. It was only the weakness of the Lombard monarchy that saved the imperial forces from being swept from the shores of Italy, and the pope from being reduced to the level of a Lombard bishop. As if that could happen. Shows you whose side God is on. Because the Pope gets power. The Pope gains power. Whereas the Byzantines lose all of their power in Italy. the lobster invasion. If you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you give a man a rat, you satisfy his rat desire. The big rat will always win. That just shows you whose side God is really on. Preceding invaders of Italy had, as we have seen, regarded the Roman inhabitants as fellow partners in the empire. The Lombards, on the contrary, looked upon them as subjects and treated them like the Slavs in Hungary who had tilled the soil for their warrior overlords. It's pretty fitting for Slavs. The Roman landlords were expropriated and their land, cattle, houses, and colony became the booty of the conquerors. Yeah. But it was not land, as such, that the Lombards wanted. It was rather the means of living in idleness, or in economic freedom to make war. The Roman land organization was therefore retained. It was merely the ownership that changed hands. The colony became identical with the Lombard half-free class, the Aldiones, and some of the poorer landholders seem to have shared their fate. Church property was seized without scruple, for the Arian invaders were not inclined to respect the rights of Catholics. By this process, every free Lombard came to be both soldier and landowner. Though the size of the holdings was not uniform, much of the land being retained by the dukes for their private estates. Under the combined influence of continued settlement and Roman organization, the clan gradually disappeared and was replaced by territorial ties. The unit was the duchy, and the extent of these duchies coincided, on the whole, with the districts, civitates, previously governed by magistrate and bishops, the chief town remaining the center of administration. The duchies of Spoleto and Benevento, however, covered a much larger area and were practically independent principalities, being isolated from the northern Lombards by a belt of imperial possessions. Again, let's see. This is the belt he's talking about. So you have your northern duchies with Milan as your capital. And then your southern duchies, your Duchy of Spoleto and Benevento. By the end of the 6th century, the Lombard kingdom was firmly established in Italy. The monarchy had been restored under Autari, and owing to this reassertion of the central power, the Lombards had not only held their own, but even increased their territory at the expense of Byzantium. Their chief danger at this period was the aggression of the Franks, who made continual raids into northern Italy in concert with the imperial attacks from Ravenna. Autari, 589 to 590, succeeded in ending this Franco-Byzantine alliance, which was, it is true, already undermined by the mutual suspicions of both parties, each of which accused the other with considerable justice of playing for its own hand. For a century and a half, thanks to Atari's achievement, Lombardy was free to concentrate its defense upon a single front. Defense, however, was not enough. The king's position depended upon the size of his personal following, which enabled him to cope with the more powerful of his dukes. Owing to the lack of a regular financial system, this following had to be rewarded by grants of land, and this in turn necessitated further conquest. Any increase in the Lombard population worked also to the same end, since, as in ancient Sparta, each free warrior was economically dependent on his plot of land, tilled for him by servile labor. The result was a continual series of raids upon the neighboring territory, and under this pressure, the internal organization of Byzantine Italy transformed itself during the 2 centuries which followed into a military system of defense. Sorry. Justinian had been careful to restore Italy and Africa. To restore to Italy and Africa the administrative conditions of the 4th century, under which the military and civil powers were strictly separated. In the East, however, he had in some provinces favored the union of both powers in the hands of a single officer, a practice which developed into the theme system of later times. This policy was inevitable, and before long it was extended to the West. Every year the barbarian menace became more terrible, and there was no corresponding increase of the resources wherewith to meet it. Military considerations, in consequence, became paramount. Continual war conditions transformed the civil machinery of ancient Rome into medieval feudal dispositions. The soldier is now the most important member of the community, and in Italy a soldier class finally emerges as one of the chief divisions of the free population. The same principle is reflected both in central and local government. The exarch, an official combining the supreme military and civil powers, is appointed at first in cases of special emergency, but soon becomes the regular governor of Italy, overshadowing the civil prefect, whose sphere is confined to duties of financial supervision. The exarch is the Byzantine governor I was talking about earlier, who is pretty much useless in most cases throughout the time period that they exist. Obviously, there are exceptions, but for the most part, pretty useless, as most of the Byzantines were after Justinian. Yeah, that's not actually true. There were, especially during the Islamic invasions, there were several Byzantine leaders who were quite capable. But when it came to Italy and the ruling of Italy and defending Italy and helping defend Italy, useless. They did next to nothing. The Exarch never did anything. Byzantium almost never sent any help. And that is why the Pope turned to the Franks. In the towns, the municipal council and officers slowly disappear before the growing power of the military commander. The tribunus, who adds judicial and executive roles to his original authority. Italy was now a frontier march, and every walled city became a fortress to be held against the enemy. From his headquarters at Ravenna, the Exarch directed the defensive system, elaborately centralized, whereby Byzantium, hard-pressed as she was by Avars and Bulgarians on one side, and the gathering storm of Arab invasion on the other, contrived nevertheless to keep her hold upon Italy for nearly 2 centuries. A notable achievement in view of the peculiar difficulties presented by this province. Its interests were no longer identical with those of the capital. It mattered little to the Roman nobleman or the Italian peasant that Byzantium needed soldiers and money for the Eastern Front. What immediately concerned them was the Lombard danger, and the imperial troops were inadequate to deal with this, though troops and subsidies were from time to time dispatched for the purpose. It was necessary to make Italy depend on her own resources, and to this end the citizen population became a militia, stiffened at first by Byzantine detachments of regulars, but later drawn almost entirely from native sources. Under the Exarch were duces, controlling the new divisions into which the remnants of imperial Italy had been grouped, and tribuni, commanding the city garrisons. Armies were maintained at strategic points, Ravenna, Rome, Naples, Calabria, while the fleets of Ravenna and Sicily secured communication by sea. On the land, the main artery of a defense made difficult by geographical conditions was the road connecting Ravenna with Rome, and this was carefully guarded by a line of castles and by a special force stationed at Perugia to control the crossing of the Apennine passes. Perugia. Where are you at? Perugia. Right smack dab in the middle. So Ravenna to Rome, pretty straight line through this belt. It goes right through Perugia. Or Perugia, it says. Yeah, Perugia. And so there's a mountain range right here. Not a, not a Himalayas type of mountain range, but a mountain range. And so there's mountain passes that Perugia keeps watch on. All right. Centralization went farther. Determined efforts were made to assimilate Italy in every way to the other provinces of the empire. Greek officials were placed in charge of the administration, and Greek methods adopted. Byzantine titles were bestowed upon members of the Italian aristocracy, and when their loyalty had been proved, executive officers were entrusted to them. A host of Oriental merchants, craftsmen, pilgrims, priests, and monks made its way into Italy. Byzantine manners and dress prevailed among the upper classes. Gregory of Tours describes the Roman noblemen whom he saw clad in silk dresses studded with jewels, and the mosaics of Ravenna tell the same story. Gregory of Tours is one of the main historians we have on the Frankish Empire. He was a monk, I believe, of that time period. And so it's one of the primary sources we have is Gregory of Tours. Moss, I'm pretty sure, quotes a good bit from Gregory of Tours. It gets a lot of his information from him. Henri Pirenne is another author I've read who quotes Gregory of Tours a lot. Pierre Riche is another Byzantine or Frankish scholar who quotes a lot from Gregory of Tours. He also quotes from Isidore of Seville. I think Saint Isidore of Seville. He also quotes the Historiae Franco. I'm blanking on the name. It's whatever history of the Frankish Empire is in Latin. Or book on Frankish history, I believe, is the translation, which is written by an anonymous French monk. The Chronicle of Fredegar is another, very popularly cited primary source of this time period. And there are plenty of other primary sources. One of the books I read by Pierre Riche was very interesting. Daily Life in the World of Charlemagne. He uses a lot of primary sources from basically the administrative side of the Frankish Empire. Because Charlemagne, he wanted to, one of his main reforms was getting back to how Rome kind of did things administratively. So a lot of writing. Everything was written down. And so there's quite a bit of writing from that time period. Even though some of it is, we have more writing from that time period, partially because none of it's written on papyrus. Papyrus deteriorates pretty easily. And honestly, that might be One of the reasons that there isn't a ton of writing from that time period is because papyrus was one of the main. But then again, I think we do have a good bit of writing from the Roman time period and the ancient Roman time period. I don't know. That might be interesting to look into. But papyrus became less and less used as the Islamic invasions came forward. Honestly, kind of as the Vandals, because a lot of papyrus came from Africa, and once the Vandals were in control, that supply got cut off. It was reestablished. Obviously, Justinian reestablished an imperial presence in Africa. He reconquered North Africa from the Vandals. But once the Muslims take over North Africa, there is almost no papyrus at all anywhere in Europe. It just kind of ceases to be there. And so they develop parchment, and they write on skins. They find other ways of doing it. And some of the ways that they develop, like parchment, last a lot longer than papyrus. Papyrus, like I said, papyrus tends to deteriorate decently quickly enough. I believe. Don't take my word for it. But that might be why we have a bit more writing from the 800s or the 700s, 800s, 900s. Because maybe those writings survived. Could be an interesting thing to look into. At Venice, eunuchs and separate women's quarters recalled the customs of Constantinople, and the ceremonial robes of the doges betray a similar origin. In the churches of Italy, Eastern saints and martyrs received special attention at this time. Dedication, for instance, to St. Michael, St. Theodore, Saints Cosmas and Damian became common, while Byzantine ritual and art were freely employed in the ecclesiastical buildings and services. Cosmas and Damian. Are they the ones who converted Ukraine and Poland? Because if so, they are technically no, they're different. They're not. I'm thinking of someone else. Arab physicians. Okay, yeah. No, I'm thinking of two different saints. Cyril and Methodius. Right. Yeah, the Cyrillic alphabet. Yeah, Cyril and Methodius. Widely considered Eastern saints, they got their mission from Rome. They were originally part of the iconoclastic heresy, and I think, or they were in the East while that was happening, but they got their authority and their mission from Rome. They got the mission to convert Russia and Ukraine and Poland from Rome. So, but that not Cosmas and Damian. Cosmas and Damian were different. I always get confused by the saints who are normally celebrated together, except obviously, Peter and Paul. If I got Peter and Paul confused with Cosmas and Damian, that would be a separate issue. A separate issue on my part. But yeah, Cyril and Methodius. Great saints. Cosmas and Damian, great saints. They're saints. Obviously, they're great. But a little sidetracked here. So, dedications, for instance, to St. Michael, St. Theodore, Saints Cosmas and Damian became common, while Byzantine ritual and art were freely employed in the ecclesiastical buildings and services. Bishops and even popes bearing Greek names are recorded. The Greek language became familiar once more at Rome. From his palace on the Palatine, the Roman dukes, representative of the exarch, and through him of the emperor, dominated the city with his Byzantine troops, and in every large town a Greek quarter was to be found. which was prepared to support any measures taken by the central power to restore the obedience of the Italian population. Most remarkable of all was the reconquest of southern Italy by the speech, manners, and institutions of Greece, as classical Hellenism had conquered it 15 centuries before. Ugh. This process continued until the 11th century, surviving even under the Norman kings, and traces of it remain to this day. Yeah, little known fact, the Vikings conquered Sicily in the 11th century. They conquered the Vikings came down and conquered Sicily from Muslims. So that's pretty fun. Yeah, the Normans are everywhere. It was the Normans it was the Norman contingent in the First Crusade that conquered Antioch. In spite of this intensive organization, the Byzantine power in Italy rested on unstable foundations. The Lombards were to prove the immediate cause of its downfall, but the institutions themselves contained the seeds of their decay. The actual completeness of the centralizing process contributed, when the weakness of the directing center became manifest, to the emergence of local forces. The Greeks had never, even when they came to deliver Italy from the Ostrogoths, received the wholehearted support of the populace, and the exactions and rapacity of the Byzantine officials did little to increase their popularity. The antagonism between East and West, fostered by the fact that their interests were becoming increasingly divergent, was brought to a head by religious controversy. The rulers of Byzantium, bent at all costs on preserving the unity of the empire, made continual efforts during these centuries to impose compromises in religious matters, a policy which aroused fierce antagonism in a Catholic Italy, careless of the problems of imperial statesmanship. The rulers of Byzantium opposed the Pope, even internally. Crazy. Made continual efforts to impose compromises in religious matters. Who would have thought? Finally, the same decentralizing tendencies, which for the past 3 centuries had been concomitants, if not causes, of the breakup of the Roman Empire, were now accentuated in Italy by the needs of the time, which placed military considerations in the forefront. Under the stress of the invasions and of the economic ruin which they produced the old city life, and with it the middle class. I think he's missing a comma. Under the stress of the invasions and of the economic ruin which they produced, the old city life, and with it the middle classes, had gone under. The great machine, forged by Diocletian and Constantine, had confined the lower classes in corporations, working for the service of the state. The upper class had ended by controlling the machine for themselves, and the bankruptcy of the state left them yet more powerful. Great landlords took over the local jurisdiction and tax collection. They became responsible for the colony on their estates. When Italy became an armed camp and every citizen a militiaman, the military organization naturally fell into the hands of these nobles. The landowner became the leader of his retainers, as the tribune was the leader of the town contingents. And when the soldier class, owing to lack of Byzantine reinforcements, became predominantly Italian, local patriotism was bound to develop. The process was completed by the gradual identification of the Byzantine officials with the Italian aristocracy, since the former endeavored to add to their powers by acquiring estates in Italy, and the latter, by holding Byzantine titles and executive offices, secured official standing and social distinction. Thus, with the waning of the central power, arises a feudal system, replacing the imperial machinery by a number of local dominations. Let's see, the Papal Estates is this next section. We will go to here. Let's see. Uh, There we go. Here we are. All right. Hmm. The remaining functions of the central government were filled by the church, the growth of whose temporal power was the last great factor in the formation of medieval Italy before Charlemagne. The Theodosian Code, and more recently the Pragmatic Sanction, had given to the ecclesiastical hierarchy not only special privileges, but also a large measure of political power, especially in the sphere of municipal government. The tribune and the bishop now shared most of the rights and duties of the old municipal officials, and the power of the church was further increased by her status as the largest landholder in Italy. In many of the towns, it was the bishop who controlled the city gates and saw to the proper garrisoning of the walls, as well as providing for the urban water supply and other services. Hospitals and charitable offices had long been the care of the church, and even in matters of jurisdiction and taxation, she had been able, by her superior organization and her moral prestige, to secure for herself a definite standing in the imperial system of government. The increasing power of the papacy is shown by the growth of the estates of the church, which not only assured the revenues of the See of Rome, but also provided a means of exerting moral and material influence throughout Italy. Since the time of Constantine, the church had been legally empowered to hold property, and this property had shown continuous increase owing to the legacies of wealthy Christians and the donations of Roman nobles. A further cause was the working of the universal tendency of the smaller landowners to place themselves under the protection of a powerful landlord, freeholders often becoming mere life tenants in return for the advantages of security. And who better to ensure your security than the church? Although bishops not always to be trusted. There's a famous quote from a cardinal who was talking with Napoleon. Napoleon after he becomes emperor. Napoleon tells him, your eminence," which is the title for a cardinal. He says, "Your eminence, do you not know that I have the power to destroy the church?" And the cardinal says, "Your excellency, do you not know that the clergy have been trying to do that for 2,000 years, and we have failed?" So yeah, bishops have notoriously not always been great, but the church itself will flourish no matter how bad her clergy is. The church will always survive, much to the chagrins of her clergy sometimes. The letters of Gregory the Great, written at the close of the 6th century, provide valuable information concerning Rome's efficient and detailed management of her various patrimonies. They serve also to show the part played by Gregory himself in developing the material resources of the church. In his instructions to the rectors, ecclesiastical officials who combined the duties of bailiffs, magistrates, and poor relief officers in their several districts, attention is paid to the minutest details of stock farming, leasing, slaveholding, and all the matters which concerned a landlord. Saddles are supplied from Campania, and wooden beams from Brutium for the use of the Roman Church. From Sicily, where lay the richest and most extensive of the patrimonies, came large contributions of corn, which secured the provisioning of Rome herself, a symbol of the replacement of imperial functions by ecclesiastical activity in the former capital of the empire. The vast revenues obtained in this way were applied to all manner of uses: ransoming of prisoners, relief of famine, maintenance of hospitals, support of various churches which had suffered by Lombard ravages. Docures, finally, on a princely scale seem to have been given to the various Byzantine officials whose cooperation was found necessary, apart from the funds employed in mere indirect diplomacy. An interesting light is thrown on these relations of Gregory with the imperial administration. His letters are full of accusations, couched in the plainest terms of rapacity and injustice. It is clear, moreover, that he speaks of one having authority, that he speaks as one having authority, and in the full expectation that his warnings will not go unheeded. Preceded and followed by obscurer pontiffs, Gregory holds already, in some degree, the position which the papacy was destined to occupy in later centuries. Head of a strong central organization, unquestioned arbiter of justice, armed with the keys of Peter and the old majesty of Rome, he is an almost superhuman figure, beside whom, in the eyes of the suffering population of Italy, the emperor is but a far-off potentate, and the exarch merely an ineffectual general or an unjust governor. Superhuman. The vicar of Christ, some could say. But yeah, this just kind of illustrates kind of what I was saying earlier, that the exarch was just ineffective, just kind of, they didn't really do much, and everyone relied on the papacy. The papacy was who everyone looked up to, and Gregory the Great is a large reason for that. Gregory the Great was pope during one of the famines, one of the plagues of that century, a very deadly plague. And so he was the one who got Rome and Italy as a whole through that tragedy. There's the famous story of the procession that ended the plague, where we get the prayer of the Regina Caeli, where they're doing the procession and Saint Michael appears, or I think it's Saint Michael. It's either Saint Michael or just an angel, where he appears and he says the first part of the Regina Caeli, Queen of Heaven, rejoice, for he whom thou didst merit to bear. Queen of Heaven, rejoice, hallelujah. For he whom thou didst merit to bear, hallelujah, has risen as he said, hallelujah. And then Gregory the Great responds, oh my goodness, I'm blank. blank. Pray for us to God, hallelujah. Ordo pro nobis Deum, hallelujah. Yeah. And so that it was said that he appeared on a hill, and that hill they built a fortress on, and they call it Castle St. Angelo, the castle of the Holy Angel, I believe. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. I'm wrong sometimes, more often than not. But that's why we do this. We have to increase our knowledge. You know what I value more than materialistic things? Knowledge. Yeah, everyone looked up to the papacy, and Gregory the Great is one of the reasons that the Pope is so influential. The Pope is influential because he is the vicar of Christ. But Gregory the Great kind of puts into perspective the human side, how we as people, not as Catholics, would look at the Pope as the leader. I guess. I don't know. That's probably not a great way of putting that. Anyway, it must, however, be emphasized that this power lay rather in the personal prestige and moral authority of Gregory than in the material force at his command. To meet the many-sided opposition to the claims of the Roman See, untiring diplomacy and careful combinations were necessary. Even within the confines of Italy and Istria, the great archbishops of the north, Milan, Aquileia, and Ravenna, refused to accept the domination of Rome, and though the schism was eventually healed, their independent attitude was maintained, not without secret encouragement from Byzantium, which welcomed such checks on the undue growth of papal influence. Who would have thought? Byzantium is encouraging schism? Color me surprised. But no, they're the successors of Rome. They're the successors of Rome. But Gregory's aims were wider than the boundaries of Italy. In the functionaries whom he appointed to superintend the church estates in Italy and elsewhere, he had ready to hand a corps of diplomatics and intelligence officers, through whose agency he was able to establish contact with all the governing forces of the West, lay or ecclesiastical. He did not hesitate to invite, with incomplete success, the aid of the imperial power in reducing Illyrian bishops to obedience, in repressing Donatists and pagans in the African Exarchate. In Spain, where the Visigothic kingdom had recently become Catholic, Gregory lost no time in entering into close relations with the royal house, as well as with the hierarchy of the new church. Important note about Visigothic Spain. He might get into this later, but an important thing happened during the reign of Gregory the Great. So there was an attempt at forced conversions in Spain, specifically of Jews. The Visigothic king tried to force all the Jews in Spain to become Catholic. Gregory the Great said, no, you cannot force someone to become Catholic. That is just not how you do things. A century later, another Visigothic king does it again. He launches a full-on persecution of the Jews in Spain, trying to force them to convert. The Pope at the time, I'm pretty sure, just reaffirms what Gregory the Great teaches. You can't force conversions. But less than a century later, Toledo falls. And the gates are opened from within. What I'm trying to say is some people have long memories. But just keep in mind that in Spain, they tried to force Jews to convert. Gregory the Great condemned that. You can't force conversions. And Toledo fell. Put two and two together. You do with that what you will. In France, a determined, though fruitless, effort was made to exercise, through the papal legate at Arles, that authority over the national church to which the Roman bishops had long laid claim. The correspondence of Gregory with various Frankish sovereigns, in particular the notorious Brunhilde, urges the suppression of simony and other abuses in the church, improves his intimate acquaintance with the conditions prevailing in the various dioceses, as well as with the course of political events. The papal claims were received with respect rather than admission, for the Merovingians were not inclined to surrender the advantages of ecclesiastical control. The Merovingians are the Merovingian kings, the descendants of Clovis. They held a lot of power over the ecclesiastical control. They would elect bishops. They had almost direct control of who became a bishop or not. It wasn't until, I think it was Gregory the Seventh, that system of monarchies having a say in over ecclesiastical matters, having a say over who becomes bishop and whatnot. I don't think it was until Gregory the Seventh in the 11th century that was basically condemned, was reformed. Yeah, so you see this type of thing, the ecclesiastical control of the monarchy throughout the Frankish history. Even Charlemagne has a lot of direct control over, especially Charlemagne, over who becomes bishop and not. And he actually used it for good. He had a lot of very good bishops. And he actually used his bishops, and he got them to convene. He called a council to help Rome combat the iconoclastic heresy in Constantinople. So Charlemagne definitely used that ecclesiastical control the best of anybody. He had the best organizational control. And several of the bishops he appointed, I'm pretty sure, are saints. I'm forget. There's one in particular whose name I'm blanking on. He's extremely important. We'll come across him later. If we don't, I would be very surprised. But the personal influence of Gregory was recognized throughout France, and a still further extension of his activities is shown in Augustine's mission to England, which was destined to have such important consequences. St. Augustine of wow. Not what Canterbury. St. Augustine of Canterbury. Meanwhile, the primacy of the Roman See was stubbornly maintained against Eastern encroachments, a bitter controversy being carried on with the Bishop of Constantinople, who claimed, as Metropolitan of the capital of the empire, the title of ecumenical or universal patriarch. Relations with Byzantium were strained still further by the diverging theories of papacy and empire. To Gregory, the Pope was above the exarch, the Church above the state. To the successors of Justinian, on the other hand, the Italian province, like other parts of the empire, was subject to the emperor and his subordinates, for it is not the state which is within the church, but the church which is within the state. To Gregory, convinced that the sole path to heaven lay for those called thereto, through priesthood or monastery, the decree of the Emperor Maurice forbidding ordination or the cloister to his civil servants or soldiers became a crime which would have to be answered for at the terrible judgment of the last day. A Byzantine bishop, closer to the eastern frontier and consequently more aware of the desperate peril of the empire and its need of every possible recruit if civilization itself were to be saved from destruction, would perhaps have been more understanding than Gregory. As it was, relations between Rome and Constantinople were practically broken off at one period, and the paean of rejoicing with which Gregory greeted the assassination of Maurice shows the depth of his conviction that the interests of the Church had been gravely menaced by the policy of the dead emperor. No thoughts, however, of a possible separation from Byzantium can have entered his mind, and indeed the Italian situation forbade it. The enemy was at the gate, and though he underestimated the difficulties that confronted the exarch, Gregory fully recognized the value of his protection and the necessity for cooperation in dealing with the Lombards, though even here hints of a separate policy foreshadowed the future course of papal diplomacy. The character of Gregory was admirably fitted to deal with a peculiar situation. By birth a Roman noble, he had filled the office of prefect of the city before entering a Benedictine monastery. In his subsequent career as papal legate at Constantinople, he had enjoyed opportunities of observing the imperial diplomacy at first hand, in that city which was still the center of European politics. Nothing is more marked in Gregory's activities than the clear-sighted realism with which he interprets the current of affairs both in the empire and in the barbarian kingdoms, and even diverts it on occasion to the service of the Church. Succeeding to the papacy at a time when all Italy was in utter confusion and distress, he found himself at the head of the only stable institution in a changing world. His surroundings reinforced the teaching of his legal and administrative training. Only by material means in such an age could the church perform fully its work of spiritual salvation. Stress is accordingly laid on the practical doctrines of penitence and purgatory, on the atoning power of benefactions to the church. Unworthy instruments, Brunhilde in France, Phocas at Byzantium, stained by many and notorious crimes, are nevertheless hailed as champions of the church, for the civil power lies in their hands, and only through them can justice be enforced. Gregory's realism shows itself also in his disregard of literary style, of classical education, even of orthography. He frowns upon any extraneous studies that may hinder the interest of or create a spirit critical towards a church whose unquestioning obedience constitutes its true strength. So true. Gregory openly professed ignorance of Greek based. His acquaintance with church history is curiously slight, and his most characteristic production is his commentary on the book of Job, with its fantastic interpretations and strained allegorical conceits. There's nothing allegorical about Job. I don't know. I haven't read Job in a while. But if he's saying that the story itself is allegorical, he's wrong. It happened. It is sufficient evidence of the decline in cultural standards which had taken place since the days of Boethius and Cassiodorus that the medieval reputation of Gregory, apart from his pastoral rule, rests mainly on his dogmatic learning. But we are still on the threshold of the Middle Ages. Gregory is the last great personality of the transition period in the West. There is little indication that he realized the new paths which the papacy was destined to tread. It was sufficient for him to deal with each emergency as it arose. To preserve the Catholic faith from compromise or error, to protect the suffering population of Italy, and above all to maintain intact the powers and privileges of the Bishop of Rome. He is a Janus-like figure. One aspect foreshadows, at least to later eyes, the papal domination of the West, the temporal power of the Church, the peculiar blend of legalism and mystic doctrine which characterizes medieval thought. The other aspect shows us the greatest of those Roman nobles turned bishop, who, in Gaul, Africa, or Italy, through the wreckage of the empire, led their retainers in a desperate fight against the swamping deluge of barbarian invasion, owing what success they gained less to the material forces at their command than to the unwilling respect accorded by their enemies to strength and nobility of character, and to the glamour of an ancient civilization. As an epitaph proclaims him, Gregory is God's consul, a Roman statesman last of his line. And that is where we shall end today. That leaves us with about 8 pages to get through on Friday. 7 pages. No, 5 pages. Five and a half pages. So yeah, Friday will be short, which is fine because I'm going to have to start late anyway. Friday will be short, sweet and to the point. We're going to finish up this chapter and then take a break. Like I said, we're going to be reading the first chapter of En Route by Joris Karl Huysmans. We're just gonna go with the most American pronunciation I can pull off. It'll be fun. We'll have fun. Yeah, I definitely kind of want to look into the idea that maybe the Dark Ages weren't so dark, and that papyrus just deteriorates. That could be an interesting idea. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have that idea, so, maybe my idea will just get debunked very easily, which would be fine. I mean, I don't pretend like I know all of this all that well. But yeah, it could be interesting. Could be the play. But that's it for me. My voice is shot, and I have to sing tomorrow for choir at church. It'll be fun. It'll be good. Been practicing. Forgot it was tomorrow. Good thing I've been practicing though. But yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you'd if you have any suggestions, some ideas, criticisms, or if you just want to say hello. Pop into the comment section. Tell me how you feel. And I will see you all on Friday, hopefully. But you have a good night.